Welcome to the Application Performance webinar on Understanding Business Connectivity Services. I'm Zoe Buckingham, AP's Head of Marketing, and I'm here with Brett Lonsdale, owner of Lightning Tools, and a man who really understands what makes SharePoint an unparalleled success. I'm also joined by Mick McGuinness, one of our directors, and a leading SharePoint performance specialist. You may have seen that we're offering a driving experience in a radical SR3 racing car at Silverstone, England. If you'd like to win the prize, please listen out so that you can answer the following question at the end of the webinar. Okay, so the question is, how does WebTuna collect performance metrics about the end user experience? Number 1, network capture appliance. Number 2, reading the IIS server log files. Number 3, adding JavaScript to the SharePoint master page or through WSP deployment, or number 4, Windows Server Monitoring Agent. So look out for the answer to this question in Mick's presentation. On the screen you'll see a control panel. This control panel contains a questions box where you can type questions to be answered by the speakers. Brett and Mick will be pleased to answer your questions at the end of the presentation. We'll also be tweeting the highlights of this webinar on the hashtag #BetterSharePoint, so please join in. Thank you for joining us, and over to Brett.
Okay, thank you very much, Zoe. And thank you for everybody joining the webinar as well. First of all, just like to thank Application Performance for the opportunity to do the demonstration for some of your customers, and I think there's also a few people that have joined from the tweets and so on that you've been sending out as well. So all of you are welcome. To briefly introduce myself, Zoe already kindly introduced me as an expert in SharePoint. There's one area that I specialize in SharePoint, and that is obviously the business connectivity services that we're going to be talking about today. So my experience of BCS actually goes way back. In fact, before BCS, when I first started looking at Microsoft SharePoint in the 2003 version, I was quite interested with the data view web part, or as it was, the data view web part as it was through front page at the time, and accessing external data and being able to manipulate that data and display it in SharePoint. The opportunities in order to connect to back-end systems like Microsoft Navision or SQL databases and Oracle databases was huge, and that got better in 2007 with the Business Data Catalog that was introduced for SharePoint 2007 Enterprise customers. So with that, you had not just the ability to display data in SharePoint, but also to be able to look up data inside your SharePoint lists and libraries, and being able to search that external data as well, and a whole lot more. So that excited, I decided to write a book about it. I have no idea who the guy is on the front cover, but it's absolutely nothing to do with BDC. This is something that Manning, the publishing agent, decided to put on the book. So there we are. That's not me or anything like that. As time went on, SharePoint 2010 was released with the business connectivity services, and one thing that got a lot better at that time was the ability to write back to external data as well. So we had something called the external list, and the external list looked and behaved like any ordinary SharePoint list, so we could view our customers, view our orders, that sort of thing inside a SharePoint list, but also write back to the data store. So if we wanted to be able to mark orders as payment received and things like that, we could do that through the SharePoint interface, and that meant that we could cut down a lot on training people on back-end systems and so on, since the whole aim would be to have everybody using SharePoint anyway. So there's a couple of books that I've written on the subject. What we're going to obviously be talking about today is SharePoint Online and business connectivity services. Some of you may be using SharePoint 2013 or even 2010, and if you are, please don't drop off the call. Nearly everything that you're going to learn, even though we're in the SharePoint Online space here today, is going to be relevant to you in 2010 and also 2013 as well. You'll certainly gain a lot from it. So the first thing to really understand is, why do we want to use business connectivity services? What does it bring to us? And maybe there's some of you on the call that aren't aware of what business connectivity services does actually provide you. So business connectivity services, as I mentioned, back in 2007 it was introduced as the BDC, available for enterprise customers. The good news is that it's now available across the board. So if you used SharePoint Foundations in 2010 through to Enterprise, or SharePoint Foundations in 2013, or also SharePoint Online, you can use business connectivity services. And what we're going to use it for is to connect to external data. So if we've made the investment to use Microsoft SharePoint for our central collaboration intranet, or as our document management system, whatever you're using SharePoint for, we can also use it as a means to display data and bring silos of data together, so that we've not got to train finance departments on how to use the sales system, so that they can see what orders are coming through. Likewise, we don't have to train our salespeople on how to use the finance to see if their customers are paid, and so on and so forth. We can expose the data in SharePoint, build some very powerful dashboards with KPIs and so on, so we can get some good business intelligence being displayed inside SharePoint. We can also, as I mentioned, write back to the data. So if you wanted to have what's known as the CRUD experience, the ability to create data and update data and delete data, then you can do so. And also the ability to search data as well. So so we might just be doing something as simple as searching for a customer name, and rather than just bring back documents from SharePoint or list items from SharePoint with that customer name in it, we could also bring back the customer details from perhaps your CRM system, whether it's Salesforce or Dynamics CRM, whatever it is. So the whole idea is to bring, like I say, these silos of data together and display them in SharePoint. Now, business connectivity services is not the only way to display data in SharePoint. There's lots of other ways. So what we'll do is just discuss briefly, where does business connectivity services sit in the whole scheme of things. If you are using SharePoint Online, then unless you've been under a rock, or if you're not looking at Microsoft sites regularly, it's been very difficult to avoid the Power BI marketing that's been taking place. So with SharePoint Online only, you've now got something called Power BI. And that's a whole suite of things beginning with the word Power. So Power Query, Power Pivot, Power Q&A, Power Map, and so on, that you can use inside SharePoint. Well, it's actually inside Excel, but you can expose the Excel workbooks in SharePoint as well. And that will allow you to build, again, some powerful dashboards of data and what have you. So you can, using Power BI, part of Power BI is something called the Data Management Gateway. Now this is really useful if you've got data on premises. So a lot of people currently that are looking to use SharePoint Online may have an SQL server or an Oracle server sat in their office rather than in the cloud, and they want to connect to it and display that data in SharePoint Online. So this is very easy to do if both SharePoint and the external data are both on-premise, but if we want to be able to connect to data that's on-premise and we've got SharePoint in the cloud, then there becomes a bit of an issue. So we can use the Data Management Gateway, which will help with that. It's something that you'll install on the SQL Server or the Oracle Server to effectively expose the data via a service, and then we're using that or consuming that data using the Data Management Gateway. So nothing to do with BCS, but that's one opportunity that you have. Of course, you might also look at building your own custom app. So within SharePoint Online, we can create some custom apps. We can get it external data that way, whether it's via OData or what have you. And then there's also third-party products as well. I'd recommend taking a look at the App Store, and there's a whole suite of apps in there. Some of them will you'll be able to add the app to a page and connect to some external data. So what we're going to be focusing on is the business connectivity services. What that provides us with is a suite of different web parts that we can add onto the page and display data. We have the external list that I mentioned, so that's just like using a task list or an announcements list or a contacts list or something, but the data is coming from externally. So we're just linking to that data and displaying it in the list. We've also got probably my favorite part of BCS is the external data column, and this allows us to create documents and document libraries or list items in lists and populate some of the metadata via a lookup to your external data. So imagine you're creating a customer proposal as a salesperson, you're storing that customer proposal inside a document library rather than type in the customer name and have our colleagues type in the customer name using abbreviations and so on. We could look up the data from the external system, and that provides consistency through the data so that when we're searching it and we're filtering it, we get that consistent filter, if you like, and lookup. And of course there's also the Office integration. So Business Connectivity Services is not just available inside SharePoint Online but also Microsoft Office. So if you're using Outlook or if you're using Visio or Excel and Word and so on, these all integrate with BCS as well. Okay, so those of you that are using SharePoint on premises, if you're using SharePoint 2013, this is pretty much the overall diagram of what components make up BCS. So on the server we've got some of those things that we just talked about. We've got the web parts, which are a read-only view of the data. We have the search, so you can search external data. If you've got a hybrid environment, then that search can be configured to search. You could expose the search results in SharePoint Online and so on from your on-premises environment. We have the external data column as well, the object model, so you can manipulate the data, and a whole suite of bits and pieces there. And on the client, most of the Office suite integrates with BCS in one way or another. So there's a runtime, what's known as the BDC runtime, Business Data Connectivity. We have something called the external content type, which we'll be talking about towards the end of the presentation, and we've got some connectors that using those connectors we can connect to most external data sources. Okay. In SharePoint Online, then what we have is basically again the ability to connect to external data. What a lot of people are looking at doing is either using SQL Azure or OData to get at their data. So we could very easily expose data from an on-premise server. So if we did have SQL on-prem or we had Oracle on-prem, using Visual Studio and not having to write any code, you can expose the data, and again we'll be talking about that a little bit towards the end. So via a service we can expose the data and then consume that via OData in SharePoint Online. And if you're using Azure, then you can use SQL Azure. A lot of people are using the service bus to replicate data from on-premise to SQL Azure, and they can connect to the data and expose it that way as well. So there's a couple of opportunities in order to get at your data. Okay. So do you have business connectivity services is a good question. So I mentioned it's available across the board. This slide might be difficult to read on your screen at the moment, but hopefully if you watch the recording, I'll also be making my slides available to Application Performance, so they can announce where that will be hosted. And what you'll be able to see on here is a whole number of yeses that have been highlighted, and that is across the Office 365 Enterprise versions. So we've got E3 and E4, E2, and also the government E3 and E4 as well. So if you're using those, you'll have things like the profile pages, you'll have BCS Secure Store, the external list, and all of these things that we're going to be talking about today. Okay. So what we'll start off looking at is the external list. So this external list is the tool that's going to be allowing us to manipulate the data. So as I've mentioned, it's like a SharePoint internal list. What's quite critical to mention is the fact that the data that you're going to be looking at inside the external list is linked to and not imported. That's quite key. Customers that I speak to, they have hundreds of thousands of rows of data in some tables, if not millions in some cases, and one thing you certainly don't want to do is look at importing that data into a SharePoint list. If you do that, then that's just going to perform badly, and also it's going to have record locking issues when you're trying to synchronize back to the original data store as well. So obviously people might be updating CRM at the same time that somebody's updating the external list, and when you go to write back, you're overriding their changes and so on. So this is a great way of designing it. Microsoft has done a great job here where they link to the data and it's displayed inside the external list. Now, of course, that means there's a few things that won't work. So if we, for example, go to create a new view, you'll find that you can't create a datasheet view. The quick edit doesn't work. You won't be able to create a workflow without a bit of work behind the scenes, and also the RSS feed doesn't work as well. And you'll find item level permissions and things are not available. However, it's still very powerful. You can create views, you can create filters, you can apply sorts, you can have lookups and all sorts of things from that external list. So rather than just talk about it, let's have a look at it. Here we are in SharePoint. We've got Office 365 running, and you'll see I've got a couple of lists already created. So if we click onto the products external list, this has gone and got my data. So, so we're looking at a whole bunch of data coming from that external list, and as we click this tilde here, you'll notice that we've got the ability to view the item, view profile and things like that. And if we want to, we can also create other methods that will allow us to write back. So so we could create a creator method, an updater method, and a deleter method. If we don't create them, they don't show. So it is possible to have a list experience that is read-only as well for your users. So that's the external list as far as it looks. You've also got the ability to create multiple views. Now what's nice about this is users can create multiple views just like they would do in any ordinary SharePoint list, but you as the person who's creating the external content type could create multiple finder methods for them, and those finder methods will equate to views. So if you wanted to display customers and you wanted them to be organized into different countries, you could already create those finder methods with a filter in place so that the user, as soon as they create the external list, all of those views are available for them. But from the list ribbon, you'll notice you've got the create view, so we can go and create a new view for that. Again, we can export to an Excel, we can set up alerts, all of the things that you would expect to work inside an external list. To create them, we hit the site actions, we go to add an app, and in the choice of apps, we'll have the external list. I'm just waiting for it to jump out and slap me. It's probably on the next page. Let's have a look. Okay, here it is. So, so we can choose external list, and we can give a name to the external list, but also look up one of the external content types. So the external content types will have already been created by whoever's creating the connection for you. So we can simply go through and select those, click onto OK, and provide a name for it. And once we hit create, we have the brand new external list. So, so that's been created. We can click onto it and start to see the data. So from an end user point, it's very quick and easy to create an external list. The web parts, these are read-only. They're added to any SharePoint page. So you can add them to a wiki page, or you can add them to a web part zone. So great for building dashboards. Although they're read-only, you can do quite a lot with them. You can connect the web parts together, and you can also connect the web parts to other lists and libraries as well. So imagine having a document library that's using the BCS lookup, So we're seeing documents that are associated to a particular customer, and then selecting a customer from a BDC list web part and having that filter out the documents associated with that customer. They're the sort of scenarios that you could build using the web part connections. So again, here in the in my Office 365 environment, I've already got one of the web parts configured. It's always good to have a Blue Peter only version when you're doing a live demo, so that's already added here, but I've got an unconfigured BDC item web part. So what I'm going to do here is just go through and edit the page, and using this BDC list web part, what we can do is just go through to the edit web part to have a look at the properties. And you'll notice we've got a type selected. Now that type is the external content type. Again, we're going to be having a look at how to build that at the end of the session. So we can look up, as we did with the external list, all the different types that we have available to us, choose the one that we want to display, and set the view. So there isn't a drop-down available for me in this view because I've not created multiple finder methods. If I did, then they would display here. There's also the XSL editor. So those of you that love XSL, you can come in here and you can brand away. Unfortunately, obviously with SharePoint Designer, you no longer have the Design tab. So if that's news to you, I'm sorry. But when you go to customize a page in SharePoint Designer, you only get the code view now. So it becomes very difficult to brand the BDC web parts or apply conditional formatting, that sort of thing, or even just fix some of the minor formatting, like the unit price would be great if that was formatted as currency and to 2 decimal places. So anything like that we need to fix using the XSL editor, or again, there are some third-party apps in the App Store that you'll come across that do that for you. So if you don't want to develop them, you can just go and download one of those apps, which is great. You can edit the view here, so we can go through and pick and choose which columns we want to display. So you can see all the different columns that we've got available coming from that data store. So what I'm going to do is just actually trim this back. So it's taking up too much real estate on the page, so we can just get rid of some. And as we scroll down, you'll notice that we can do filters and paging and that sort of thing in here too. Okay, so give this a second and that will load. So we've now got a bit of a cleaner page available to us, but what if we want to see more details for each item? Well, what we can do, again, if we just go back into editing the page, is use this business data item web part. So that's just added by going to insert web part, and under business data you'll find all these web parts that we're looking at. So the business data item web part, we can open up the tool pane for that. Again, select the type. Okay, so we're going to select the product type again, and it asks me here which item I want to show. Well, at this point in time I don't know, but I could put in product number 1 if I want to have chai, or if I want to have tofu, then I can put product number 14 in, and so on, and it will display that item. But since I don't know, what I'm going to do is just apply the change. We'll rely on a web part connection to get our item. So, so once we've applied that, we can hit the drop down on the web part, go to connections, and get the item from my product list. Okay, so that's going to generate a connection between those two web parts. So they are now connected. We'll save and close the page. So now we have this little icon appear to the left of each row, and as we select that, it will fire off a connection to the consuming web part, and we should see all of the details about the item that we selected. Okay, and again, that can be branded. You can display an image in there if you want to. You can do all sorts of things with that. Okay, So that's the, or a couple of the web parts. There's also a related list web part, so you can have this kind of scenario as is shown inside the slide. So if we want to be able to select a customer and show the orders for that customer, we can do that, and go further too. So if we select an order, show the person who placed that order and that sort of thing. Okay, so on to my favorite part, the external data column. What we have inside any SharePoint list or libraries, we can insert columns. So it's just, again, pop into SharePoint. We've got a ready-made solution here. So here you can see I've got a number of different documents available inside the document library, and we've got some data displayed. So not only have we got the title of the document and who modified it, when it was modified, that sort of thing, but we've also got other metadata, which is what the product is and who the customer is. So if we were creating some quotations or proposals for our customers, or product catalogs or whatever it might be, we can look up to the external data source. So here, if we go to edit the properties of a document, let's just wait for that to show. There we go. So you can see I've got the name and the title, and then I've got product and customer as well. So I can simply look up to my external data source by using this select external items. Now this is a deliberate error. On here you'll notice you've got a list of product IDs. That's not very helpful. Wouldn't it be great if we could see the product name as well, rather than guess what product ID is associated to each product? So that's one of the things that we need to set when we're creating the external content type, is a property for each field called the show in picker, and this is the picker dialog box. So for each column that you want to display here, you'll select the show in picker. So what I'm going to do here is just select product number 8, click onto OK. So that's looked up a product, and then we can hit save, and that will write back that product information to my document. So now we can sort by it, we can create views and so on, and we again are getting some consistency with our data since we're looking it up and we're not just typing it in. So how do we create that? Well, let's go through and add another app. So I'm going to add a document library, and let's call it product proposals, or not. Of course, this is real world, and Office 365 looked like it just decided not to play ball. So bear with me. Okay, second time lucky. There we are. So we've got product quotes instead of proposals. So in here we've got a bog standard document library, and what I'm going to do is just go to the library ribbon and create a column inside that library. So these are the different types of or the different field types that we can have for a column. So if we wanted to have a single line of text or multiple lines of text or even a choice, we could create that easily. They're self-explanatory. Here's our external data. Okay, so we can tick the external data radio button, give the column some sort of name. So I'll call it product title, and we'll then use the external content type. So I'll point to my data, click on OK. Let's try clicking on OK again. Okay, let's just try that one more time. There we go. So I can select the external content type and then choose the columns from that external content type that I want to show. So first of all, I've got here the product name, which I want to store as the value, but other bits and pieces I could also display, like the units in price, units in stock, units on order, and so on. And when we click onto OK, those columns are now available to me. Now, Office also integrates via these. So what I'm going to do is go to my previous document library, create a new document. So we're creating a new document in Word. Okay, and here in Word, you'll see those fields that we've got available to us come through in the document information panel. Now, unfortunately, they are read-only. We can't select the product from the document information panel. But what we can do is insert these things called quick parts. So from the quick parts drop-down menu on the insert ribbon, we can go to document property and select product or customer, whichever one we choose. So I can drop product onto the document, maybe also get some other fields as well. So things like the unit price and the units in stock. Okay, and we could type a bunch of text and basically create our document. And if we click into the product field, we then get that picker display there as well. So this is now from Word looking up from my external data source, allowing me to choose a product, and that filling out the product name, the product price, and the number of items in stock that I have. So I can integrate Word with that, and notice it's also looked up that information and stored it inside the document information panel at the top as well. So I'm just going to call that my document, and we'll save that. So I'm going to save it directly into the document library, and let's refresh our library. There it is. So there's the document that we just created a few seconds ago with that information filled out. So there's great Office integration with that external data column as well, and that just opens up a whole number of powerful solutions, like the ability to search documents based on this metadata, filtering the documents, and also connecting this document library to the web parts that we just saw on the previous page, so that we can select a customer and see all the documents associated with customers and that sort of thing. So we just saw some of the Office integration. Not only does Word integrate with BCS, but also so does InfoPath, so does Outlook, so does Excel, and so on. So they can all integrate in one way or another. So how do we create this? How do we create what's known as the external content type? Well, the external content type is the thing that describes the data that we're going to connect to. It has the connection string to the data, and it also has a number of different methods that we will use to return the data as well. So inside SharePoint Designer, you'll create what's known as an external content type. And that external content type, once we're creating it, we'll go through and click on to Add Connection and connect to our external data source. Once you've got that connection, there'll be a number of different tools and views and stored procedures available. We can select the one that we want, and then we create these methods on each one. So you'll find the methods. We have one known as the read list, which is for the developers amongst you is called the finder method. So that finder method is basically going to return every row and every column from the table view or stored procedure that we pointed it to. So that allows us to have data displayed inside the external list, inside the web parts, and so on. So when I go and navigate back to my page here, that web part is calling the finder method, or the read list method. It's got all of the columns available and all of the rows available. And for each finder method, you can go through and add filters. So you could have a limit filter. It's a good idea for a limit filter to limit the number of items for the external list. The default limit for an external list is 2,000 rows. It can be increased to 5,000, and this is using the sorry, I forget the name. It's basically a threshold that you can set. For other data sources, if you're connecting to OData or Oracle or something like that, it will be based on the size of the data that's coming through, not the number of rows. So there are limits for external lists. So in your Finder method, you can put a limit filter in place to cater for that. There's also a specific finder. The specific finder allows us to look up a particular row. So an example where that is being called, if I click onto this icon on the left-hand side here, that is firing my specific finder method, and this web part on the right-hand side is looking up product ID number 3. So it is specifically going and fetching one row of data. So that's the job of that method. Those two methods are required. You've got to have those inside your external content type. The rest are optional. If you want to be able to write back and create new items, you have a create method. If you want to be able to update the data, you have an update method. If you want to be able to delete, you create a delete method. And if you want to be able to index the data for searching, then you create an ID enumerator method. Okay. So all of this is described inside the external content type. So let's have a look at how we build that. So here we are inside SharePoint Designer. So in SharePoint Designer, we can open up the site that we're working with, click onto external content types, and if you like, create a new external content type by clicking on the new external content type button. So we'll just let that think for a moment. It is SharePoint Designer after all. It's free, and therefore it's allowed to think for a moment. So hopefully we should bring that back any second now. If not, we have another one that we can work with. So this is a Windows application talking to my SharePoint online environment. There we go. So so we can give it a name. We can give it a display name. That's important. We want our users to understand the data that they're about to display. So for that reason, the display name might be customers, whereas the underlying name might be dbo.customers store procedure or something along those lines. So you've got to have a good friendly display name for your end users. And then the external system, this is where you can go through and add your connection. So there's 3 different things that you can connect to. You can connect to a .NET type or a WCF service or a SQL server. Now, using the SQL Server option, that is where we can connect to a SQL Azure environment, or if you're using SharePoint on-prem, you'll be able to connect to a SQL Server. So we'll just have a look at an existing one that we've got. You can see my external system already pre-configured with the username and password to go against a Azure database. That's where that data is coming from. So you'll basically just configure the connection string in there, and once you've done that, you can go through and select the different tables and so on that you want to connect to. So that's what these methods are at the bottom here. So we've got the read list method, we've got the read item method, the creator, updater, deleter, ID enumerator, and so on. So they are created via a wizard. When you go through and create a new connection, it will show you the available tables. You'll right click it and choose create all operations, and that will go through and create the methods for you. Once you've done that, you save it, and that writes back to your SharePoint Online environment. So that's one method. There is another method is you might want to try that in an on-prem environment, and then using it you can export to a model file. So the model file will show, let's open one up here. So this is what the model files look like once you've exported them from SharePoint Designer. So it's got the connection information at the top, and then each of the views, like the get all customers, is displayed here, as well as all of the different columns. And here's, for example, the show in picker. So, so that's currently set to false, so it's not going to show, so I could change that to true so that that column shows in the picker, and so on. So if you've got the model file, if you've generated that maybe in an on-prem environment, what you can do is import it into your SharePoint Online environment. So if we go into the SharePoint admin page, you can get to that, by the way, by clicking on the waffle, at the top left-hand corner, going to admin, and down here on the left we click onto SharePoint. And you'll notice BCS in the on the left-hand side. So we can choose BCS, and there is the Manage BDC Models and External Content Types. So using this method, if we've already generated a model file for SharePoint on-prem, we can export that model and import it here into the SharePoint Online experience. So here's a number of other ones that I've imported. So we can go through, select them, and that will show me the columns that I'm returning, the limit filters that I've got in place, that sort of thing. And also from here we can go through and set permissions as well. Now, that's also important to understand, because by default nobody has permissions. Even you as the administrator, if you could be a farm admin, you could be a site collection admin, doesn't matter. You won't have permissions unless you set permissions. So you can go in here, list your users that you want to be able to access the data. So if I put in Brett, let's say, so I can look at Brett. Okay, so it's thinking about that. So Brett will eventually appear in the list here, and then I can choose what permissions I want to give to Brett. So he can edit the properties of each of these web parts. He can execute the methods. He can add the web parts using the client, and also set permissions are the possible permissions that you can grant. So that's fantastic, because what you can do there is just simply decide, well, who should be able to see products, who should be able to see customers, who should be able to see orders, and so on throughout your SharePoint environment. You'll notice a URL for this one as well. This is the profile page. So it's from this screen that you can select one of these external content types and create a profile page. And that profile page is basically a landing page that shows the data. So when you search on a product or search on a customer, when you click onto the search result, it will show that data in the profile page. So we already have one created for products there in the background. Let's just have a look at how that comes across. Okay, and I'm going to wrap up here in just a moment, so it's probably one of the last things we'll look at. Let's just go to this page here. So what you'll see in the products list, as we hit the drop down, is view profile. So that's, like I say, a landing page that's going to show me more details about each of the columns and so on. So there's the profile page loading, and it's got that business data item web part on it. So this is what the search result will return once you've configured search. So the last part to talk about is the exposing your data if you have data on-prem. What you can do is use Visual Studio, create a WCF service, and inside that WCF service you can create what's known as an ADO.NET entity data model. This doesn't require you to write any code at all. You can create one of those entity data models, and there will be a wizard that you can point your connection to a SQL server or to an Oracle server, whatever you want to do, and pick and choose the columns that you want to make available, and it will generate a service for you exposing that data, and that will be effectively OData being returned. So once you've got OData returned, you can go through and build an app in Visual Studio, and we have one of these already created, or just about to be created. So here's a URL pointing to an OData service. I've named it Northwind, and this is just all I've done here is gone and already chosen File, New Project, chosen a SharePoint hosted app, given it a name. So when we select Next, we'll see all of the available tables, views, and stored procedures that have been exposed via OData. So this is on-prem data. I can basically go through and say, well, I want to connect to customers, and I also want to go and connect to order details and maybe orders, that sort of thing, and products. And when we're happy, hit Finish. And this is nice. You're using Visual Studio, but you're not coding. What it's returned for me is some external content types. I've got customers, order details, orders, and products. These are already built. All I need to do here is deploy this app, but firstly go through and set the app manifest to open up some of the data. So the start page would be the name of the list that gets generated. So you'll end up with a customers external list, an orders external list, and a products external list when you deploy this, and they'll be deployed as an app, which is a really powerful new feature to SharePoint 2013 and also SharePoint Online. Okay, so they can be deployed as an app. It only gives you the external list, but that's what most people want to use anyway. And the permissions we saw. So at that point, just to introduce a couple of things, obviously we've got a number of people that have a concern around performance. So we talked about the limit filters already. It's a good idea when you create an external content type to set a limit filter. But if there's a big tip I can give you, it's to use the stored procedures and views inside your database and not the table itself. That way you can create the subset, do your filtering of data on the server, on the database server, and then expose that data to business connectivity services. So somebody that knows a lot more about performance is Mick McGuinness, who's on the line, and he's going to demonstrate one of the application performance products, and after that there'll be plenty of time to ask me questions and also ask Mick questions as well. So yeah, over to you, Mick.
Well, thank you, Brett. I'm sure this has given all of us more of an insight into the essential elements of business connectivity. Of course, none of this really works unless it's supported by fast and reliable data delivery. And this is an area that Mick has spent years getting to grips with, and he's now going to give his unique overview of the best ways to improve performance. Thanks, Mick.
Okay, thank you, Zoe, and thanks, Brett, for the presentation. So my name's Mick McGuinness. I'm the co-founder and technical director of Application Performance. We're a UK company that specialises in monitoring and accelerating applications such as SharePoint. We've been doing that successfully now for over 10 years. So we work with many SharePoint and Office 365 customers, ranging from very small right the way through to some of the largest organisations in the world. So what I wanted to show you today is just one of the products we have in our portfolio. It's a product we develop ourselves. It's called WebTuna. WebTuna is all about real user monitoring, and what that means is getting some visibility into what your real end users are experiencing as they're using SharePoint. So the reason that's important is that users these days have high expectations around performance, and a lot of that comes down to what they experience when they're at home, when they're on Google and Facebook and online shopping. There was a study done a couple of years ago that concluded that 47% of consumers will leave a web page if it takes more than 2 seconds to load. And why that's important for SharePoint is, the very same users that are doing their online shopping and have those expectations there are coming into the office, they're using SharePoint, and the chances are they will have similar expectations around SharePoint performance. Another way of looking at it is to look at the frustration that's caused by slow performance. We all know as we use various systems and websites, including SharePoint, if that thing's running slow, that causes frustration. There was a study done a few years ago using an EEG brain scanner, as shown here, where you can see that even a very small delay in connection speed results in quite a big increase in frustration levels. So how can WebTuna help with all of that? Well, first of all, what it will do is it will measure the real end-user experience for every single page viewed by every single user that's hitting your site. It's not doing synthetic transactions. There are other solutions out there which can do that. It's actually measuring the real user performance for every single page view. So the kind of questions then that can be answered by having all this information at your disposal. First of all, is the site really slow? If you're relying on end users to tell you that the site is slow, you don't have the full picture, because if one person says SharePoint is running slow for me, you don't know, is it slow just for that one person? Is it slow for everybody? Is it just that one particular time, or is it all the time? So you need to be able to kind of quantify by measuring where it's slow and when it's slow. So is it slow during just certain times of the day or certain days of the week? Who's affected? Does it vary by location, for example? Is it users just in one office or in one country? Or is it affecting everybody globally? How does performance vary by browser? This is a very important one these days. There's a huge choice of browsers out there, and also device types as well these days with mobile and tablet. And performance varies massively depending on which browser and which device type you're connecting from. And then, of course, you need to understand which pages are slowest. It could be that every single page on the site is slow, which may point you to server-side problems, or it may be just its particular pages. It may be just one or two pages that are slow. Quite often, we'll see cases where it's the home page for SharePoint that's slow, because the customer may have decided that they wanted to cram as much information as possible onto that page, and that slows down the performance. But what that means to the end user then is that often they will have a perception that the whole of SharePoint is slow, even though it's just that one home page, and that's the one that they see most frequently. So being able to understand which pages are slow allows you to focus on those, and then to get an idea of whether it's a back-end performance problem, meaning is it the server, is it the IIS servers, or somewhere beyond that that is adding to the delay, or is it the front-end time, which means fetching all the content like images, style sheets and JavaScript files and sending those over the network back to the end user. So once you've got all that information collected, it's ultimately going to tell you where should you spend your time optimizing, because without this information you are really just in the dark, and we see customers that start adding CPUs and SSD drives and things like this, upgrading the servers, when in fact that's not where the bottleneck is. The bottleneck's somewhere completely different. So as far as getting this information, it's really simple. And this is an important slide if you think back to the competition that Zoe mentioned at the start. So the way that this gets installed is it's just 2 lines of JavaScript that need to be added somehow to the page. And in the case of SharePoint, the most common way you would do this is either add those to your master page, or you would deploy a WSP. So we have a WSP solution package that you can deploy, and that would automatically inject these 2 lines of JavaScript across the whole farm. So once the JavaScript lines are in place, what happens is users navigate through SharePoint as they normally would. The JavaScript gets loaded, and then after the onload event, which signifies that the page load has completed, the performance data is then beaconed back to the WebTuna server. And like Microsoft, we have both software as a service and on-premise options for that WebTuna server. And then to view the data, you just log into the portal and we have real-time information, so the data that comes through you can see it straight away as users are navigating the site. But we also have historical views as well, where you can look at performance trends over the last day or week or month. So I think probably the best thing to do at this point is just to show it to you. It's not going to be a very long demo today because we're coming up towards the end of the hour, but just to give you a flavour for it, we can set up trials of this. We do have a free trial if you go to the website, webtuna.com, and we can run a more extended demo for you if you're interested. So first of all, what we've got here is the Geo dashboard, and the Geo dashboard shows you for a number of different SharePoint sites here the total number of active users right now and where those users are coming from around the world. And this map's really a good way of seeing the effect of network latency on performance. So most of these sites are hosted in the UK, so you can see that the performance, which is indicated by the colour here, is mostly good for people in the within Europe. As you start to get further away from Europe, so South America and parts of Africa and Asia, you can see a lot more red, which indicates poor performance there. So that's one way of looking at performance. One other way you might want to look at performance is to have a look at by any of these things here. So we have, as I said, we collect every single page from every single user. So we can break down performance by any of these things. So for example, if you have a look at the page, the path, which is basically the URL, we can see a list of all the pages, and for each of those you see the URL, number of page elements, how long it took to get the first byte of content back, how long it then took to load the remaining part of the page, how many page views and how many unique users have hit the page. And just to give you an example, if I change the sort order here and sort by the worst performing, you can see we've got one here second in the list. The page load time here for this one on average is 22 seconds, and the majority of that time there is just the time to get the first byte of content back. So 16.5 seconds is spent doing something on the server side before it can even get the first byte of content back to the end user. So that's pretty important in that particular page. And going back to what Brett talked about, that could be, let's say, a page that has BCS data on there coming from an external data source, and the reason for the slow performance of that page could be because it's making an external query to to SQL Server or Oracle or some other system. So I think we're almost out of time, so I wanted to just hand back to Zoe at that point and take any questions before we wrap up.
Thank you, Mick. That was really interesting, as was Brett's presentation. We've had some great questions come in. The audience has been really active, actually. Quick question for you, Mick, while we're in WebTuna mode. Somebody's asked, does WebTuna work for Office 365 as well?
Yes, it does, absolutely, yeah. All the features that work in SharePoint on-prem also work with SharePoint Online. So yeah, no difference at all there.
Fantastic, thanks. And this is just a couple of the questions that came through to Brett, but what I think we'll do is perhaps talk with Brett afterwards about sending an update out that answers all the questions that have been asked, because there have been quite a lot. So can you look at alerts for an external list? Does it work exactly the same way as an internal list?
Okay, so yeah, if you want to set up alerts, then yeah, you can do that on an external list now. You couldn't in SharePoint 2010, but it can be done in Office 365 and 2013. So so yeah, often there's the belief that it can't be done, but yeah, alerts are available, so they work the same.
Brilliant. And we've been asked if you have any connectivity examples using Salesforce to read and render documents from SharePoint.
Yep. So I don't have any that I can show now, but yeah, if anybody wants to communicate with me afterwards, I can send some details on how to connect to Salesforce. I have that set up in an on-prem environment. I'm connecting to Salesforce.com. It has to be an enterprise version of Salesforce, so that you can register an incoming connection. But yeah, you can connect to it.
Wonderful, thank you. So what we'll do actually is distribute some questions and answers within a few days of the webinar. And finally, there's our competition to win a day's driving experience in a Radical SR3. The question should appear on the screen shortly. So how does WebTuna collect performance metrics about the end user experience? Just watching the votes come in. It's like being on the National Lottery. Okay, if we could have the last votes in, that would be great. Right, thank you everyone. I'll just share the results. Okay. It sounds as if everyone was listening very intently. Excellent. Well, thank you everyone for attending, and this webinar is being recorded, and we'll send you a link to the recording in the next few days together with a link to the slides. Thanks for attending, and we look forward to speaking with you again soon. Goodbye.